Hi, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer's Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori LeBay, and I'm so excited that you're joining us today. We are going to have a fascinating conversation, as usual, as we learn from people all around the world at all ages and stages of life. Stay tuned as we shift our dementia care from crisis to comfort.
Here we go. What you think about, you will bring about dementia change. We will.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer's Speaks. I'm thrilled you can join us today. We're going to have a wonderful conversation and learn about the GUIDE program through CMS, which is the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, that's going to focus on dementia care. They just rolled out this year. It's very exciting. But before I introduce you to our guest today, I always like to give a couple of shout outs. So one, I just want to encourage people to go to alzheimersspeaks.com because we have tons of free educational resources. You can listen, you can watch, you can download, you can read. There's all kinds of things. So please go to alzheimersspeaks.com and just click on our free educational tab. You can also find out about our book, Betty the Bald Chicken, Lessons in How to Care, which is great for all ages and all stages of life. You can also go to our sister company, Dementia Map, at dementiamap.com. It is a global resource directory where you can search over 150 categories. You can learn about terms through our glossary. You can read amazing articles and also check out events on our calendar as well. And it's free. You don't have to give us any of your personal information. So we're never going to hound you, and you don't have to worry about thinking about another password or getting hacked and scammed by us as well. And last, I just want to give a shout out to Twiddle. If you're not familiar with Twiddle, Twiddle is a fantastic company that has sensory products, and it works wonderful for people with dementia, but it can work for people living with autism and any type of sensory issues that they might have. They have a variety of different muffs that have different things to play with, kind of fidget with, but they're soft, they're warm, they're washable, they're comfortable, and they're portable. So that works really well. They also have a product called Adapt a Wrap, which is a clothing product where if you have someone that has limited mobility and raising their arms and getting a shirt over their head is difficult, this will alleviate all of that because everything goes on from the front and seals in the back, or maybe you have someone who disrobes. Please visit their website. It's the number 4 and then twiddlesplural.com and put in AS25 and you get a 25% discount. So let's go meet our guest today. Well, Marty, I'm so excited to have you on the show. We've been talking back and forth for a while, and the conversation today is near and dear to my heart since my mom lived with dementia for 30 years. And I know you're going through it yourself right now. So before we kind of dive into the GUIDE program itself, would you please introduce yourself to our audience as well as your company too?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Lori, and thank you so much for having me. I'm Marty Agather, and I am with Embrace Prevention Care. I'm responsible for sales and marketing for Embrace. And Embrace is a healthcare company that provides additional preventive care to older adults to keep them healthy and out of the hospital. We do that by convincing them that the doctors don't keep them healthy, that they have to work themselves to stay healthy. And what I guess is the genesis of our talk today is the fact that Embrace is one of 96 organizations that have been allowed to provide GUIDE services as what's called as existing services. So we are providing GUIDE care services today to patients. And there are we'll get into this later, but there are also another 300 that will be providing services in a year from now, in July of 2025.
Well, that's exciting. It's nice to see the change. I was hoping there'd be a lot more on board by now, but everything's at its own pace, and there's a reason for it.
That's
There's
correct.
lessons to be learned with all this. Now, again, before we dive into Guide, I always ask every one of my guests if they've been personally touched by dementia, and I know you've shared with me you're going through the thick of it right now. But if you don't mind giving our audience a little background, I think it's just nice when they know that you know.
Absolutely. So, even before at a higher level, what has been the driving factor of our company is the fact that, we have all had parents who, as they aged, had complex health conditions. Myself and one of our directors, we both have mothers who are experiencing dementia. My mom has been living with dementia for probably the last 3 to 4 years. About 3 years ago, we realized that my father had recently passed away. We realized that my mother was unable to continue to live on her own. So for the first year, one of her children or grandchildren traveled to Florida to her home so that we could stay with her 24/7. As we got into year 2 of that, we realized that was not, a sustainable model. And so we had discussions internally between my siblings and myself about where should mom go. And there were 3 options, with my younger brother in North Carolina, with my younger sister in Chicago, or with me here in Minneapolis. And for a number of reasons, her coming to Minneapolis made the most sense. So we brought her up 2 years ago and got her a place in an assisted living facility near my home. That was all going very well. She was doing wonderfully. We did not have some of the challenges that other people have with their parent or their loved one resisting going in. I mean, my mother was, for a while she said, I want to stay in my home, and we finally, helped her understand why that wasn't possible. But because she was involved in selecting the assisted living facility, and we visited it a number of times, it began to feel like home, and she made the decision herself to select that facility. And I think that that's a key message that everyone should take to heart, and that is, our older adults still have agency. Even in the midst of this terrible disease, they still have agency, and we should work with them when possible to help them be part of any decision. So we moved her in, and everything was going well up until earlier this summer. And our family is fortunate enough to have a long time family cabin, a 3-season cabin. It's not winterized in any way, shape, or form, in northern Minnesota. And so my mother and father would always spend their summers up there, and we have continued to do that with my mom. She was with my sister and her husband up there, and she got weak. And so they decided to bring her back and let her stay in her apartment for a few days while they went back to Chicago to take care of some business. And while she was in her apartment, she fell at some point overnight. She was fully ambulatory at this point, fell and got trapped between the nightstand and the bed frame. And she laid on the floor for what, as far as we can see, was all night long. And when they came in to check on her to deliver her morning meds, they found her and called the emergency services, and they took her to the emergency room at the local hospital. I was obviously immediately notified, went over. That turned into a multi-day stay in the hospital. One of the things that they determined was that she had contracted COVID. And so we believe that that was the original source of her weakness and probably, resulted in the fall and has made recovery very difficult. She is in transition care right now, but she is not making the progress that we would hope. And so she is now being discharged due to Medicare rules from transition care. And we are scrambling to find skilled nursing because the facility only had shared rooms for skilled nursing. Thankfully, one has opened up in the last couple of days, and we are going to move her into a private skilled nursing room in that facility, hoping that she will get better and can resume living on the assisted living side where she has her apartment, but that is not guaranteed at this point.
Yeah, it is complicated. It is so complicated. And that COVID's thrown so many people for a loop because that whole healing process, it really, it just changes everything for sure. So sorry you're going through all of that, but you definitely understand the ins and outs and those tick modes of getting bumped out of the system. And then where do you go and how the heck do you get there?
That's right. It is complicated. And I would like to offer one more piece of advice, if I may. And that is, this is a little known fact, but if your loved one goes to the emergency department and is not admitted to the hospital out of the emergency room stay, that is 100% on you. That is not part of, and I may have the details a little bit scrambled here. Because a long time ago, I wrote this up article on our website. But long story short, you really want to have your loved one admitted to the hospital after an emergency room visit because Medicare treats that completely differently, and most of those costs are covered. I believe there's still a copay for an emergency room service, even if you're admitted, but it's not the majority of the bill that you end up taking on personally. So a great thing to know and something to be aware of.
Well, and those bills are, they're just humongous. They just throw people for a loop with all of that stuff.
I think when we checked, so when she was being discharged from the hospital, we checked and they said, well, how are you going to get her back to her facility? And well, we can't put her in a car because she's bedbound. So I believe it was about $2,500 for the ambulance ride, about 6 miles.
Yep. It is crazy. It's absolutely nuts. Well, thanks for sharing that. That's a great
you're very welcome
for people to know. So let's start out with what you feel like the environment for dementia care is, as a whole. I know I have my opinion.
Sure, absolutely. And I'm looking at it more sort of that we are in a position of transition. Today, unfortunately, dementia care, dementia itself is feared, and it is it's a diagnosis that nobody wants. And when I think the best analog we have to that is how cancer was looked at about 70 years ago. And if you got a cancer diagnosis 70 years ago, there wasn't really treatment. And there were some people that were working on things, but that was prior to understanding chemo and radiation. And so if you got a cancer diagnosis, it was essentially a death sentence. There was no known cure, and you had a very, very serious illness that was going to progress and ultimately end your life. And I believe that we are in the same place today with dementia. People are just deathly afraid of hearing that. And so there is a real resistance to even thinking about it or going to a physician to confirm whether or not you've got are in early stages of the disease. And in my mind, there are so many things now that are coming online to provide hope and to indicate that we have the ability to actually treat this disease, and we can't cure it, but we can slow the effects. And the whole idea is the earlier we can detect dementia and the more we can do will lengthen the quality time that the person suffering from dementia and their loved ones can spend together. And that is the ultimate goal. So there's a number of things, 3 that are going on right now that are driving this change in dementia care. Number 1, we know that lifestyle has a direct impact on dementia. And therefore, healthy lifestyle, food, diet, it's exercise, it's hydration, it's sleep. These things are critical to keeping your mental exercise, right? Conversations with people. All of those things are critical. So these wellness lifestyle approaches are great to slow the progression of the disease. The next big thing is medicines. There are 2 approved dementia medicines now and over 120 in development. And then the third big issue is we know now that additional care for dementia patients is effective and actually has positive impact. This was piloted through some pilots through the National Institutes of Health back in the 2015-17 timeframe, where a number of teaching academic hospital systems got involved in what ultimately became the precursor and the proof for the reason that GUIDE has been developed, but working with dementia patients in a virtual model had amazing positive benefits for those patients. And so those 3 things taken together, to me, signal that we are in a new era of dementia care. And that is why we believe that everyone who is at risk should determine as early as possible that they are in early stage dementia so that we can begin to take effective action to slow the progression of the disease.
And I agree and I disagree with some of that. And I'm just going to pop that in because this is always conversational on this show. I agree with the 3 factors all the way that you talked about. And what I would love to see with the lifestyle is really that push for social engagement, which I think is kind of picked up on your number 3, but is worded differently. But I think my mom lived 30 years because she was socially engaged. And when we are socially engaged, we are hopeful, we feel part of a community. I mean, it gets rid of our depression, we feel like we belong. And to me, again, and I'm no physician or researcher, but I have talked with thousands and thousands of people all around the world. And that piece of the puzzle has such a significant impact on people. And I know there's a few studies out there doing social prescription, which I think will fit in with, the GUIDE model really, really nicely. But I just think it's so important for people to not be fearful. And the only way to get rid of that fear is to develop comfortable platforms to have authentic conversations where people can laugh and cry and be happy and mad and share their stories, because all of those individual stories raise everybody together. It takes away that I'm not alone. piece, which is massively huge and we hear over and over again. So
Mhm.
I'm really excited about all of this. I think all of these pieces together is really, really cool.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. Let me throw in one thing that as you spoke I wanted to share. Some of the research that we've been doing has indicated that two very important contributors to dementia decline are lack of hearing and eyesight problems. So please, please, please have your loved ones hearing tested, because as their hearing, if their hearing starts to degrade, that is such an impact on that socialization that you were just talking about. They can't follow. So we have been very proactive. If I can just add a little bit more to my personal story, we've been very proactive with my mother's hearing, and she's been having trouble. So at the audiologist at the last appointment, maybe 2 appointments ago, he said, you know what, you're at the point where you should upgrade the hearing aids. If she wasn't having this difficulty, I would say you could, because they're only 5-6 years old, but the technology, like everything computer oriented, changes constantly. But what he did is, so he gave her an audio test and realized that it's not the fact that the hearing aids aren't effective. It's that her brain is starting to lose comprehension because it's not working fast enough for her to understand. She was losing about 40% of the conversation. Not because the hearing aids weren't working, but because her brain was slowing down. So again, make sure you have your loved ones hearing tested, because we want them to continue to be engaged in the world around them.
And I'm going to add on to that one, because what I hear from people living with dementia is, hearing is important, sight is important, but so often we're talking to somebody and they're not able to read our lips. They're not able to see our facial expressions. Yeah. And what people with dementia tell me all the time is, please look at me when you're talking to me, because I didn't know I was reading lips. I didn't know I was reading all these facial, impressions. And that helps me figure out what is being said and what is going on. And to me, that's a really huge, huge piece, because so often we're good at separating things and going, this is a problem and this is a problem. But they can still, till the day they die, they're taking in all of this multisensory stuff. And, families and physicians and professionals truly don't understand that. They don't understand the impact of that multisensory engagement and how important that is. Anyways, I don't think so. Not to the level that they need to.
Yeah, understood. Absolutely. Great point. Thank you.
That. So let's talk about treating dementia. You had mentioned, that there's a couple of drugs, but there's really no cure. Was there anything more that you wanted to add to that at all?
No. The two drugs are outrageously expensive. They're both focused on plaque in the brain, which is one of, not the only contributor to dementia. There are, at least a half a dozen, probably more than that, vascular dementia. But the one that's most aggressive, and I believe is the primary cause of Alzheimer's, is this plaque in the brain. And those medicines, again, they don't eliminate the plaque. They just slow its formation. So right now, again, the medicines are not a cure, but they are, $30,000 to $50,000 a year for the meds. So they are not a solution in many instances.
Yeah, and there's side effects that can be with those as well. The other thing, there's the new blood test everyone is pushing, to see if you
Yes.
Alzheimer's and stuff. And I will just mention there's a lot of pushback from the public on that, going, what's that going to do to my insurance? Now, is that going to be an existing thing and I'm not going to be able to be covered, or am I going to get my driver's license pulled? There's so many factors that no one's really talking about. How is that going to impact long term? And if we're looking at just approaching it from, a prescription thing, there's not a lot that's really doing anything major, in my opinion, out there.
Mm-hmm.
It's helpful to a point, but I also understand from a realistic factor, and again, I don't think this is taken into play and it's not talked about a lot, but I can't tell you one person, and really not one person that I know out of everybody I know around the world living with dementia who has not had their diagnosis change. So they start out with Alzheimer's, and then it's Lewy body, and then it's Parkinson's, and then it's MCI, and then it's, and so this is not a black and white deal here with all of this. And I think that's something that families need to be prepared for from their doctors as well, is that this is a baby disease. We're still learning all the twists and turns and defining it as we go. With that. But let's talk about the guide, because tell us what are the goals of the program? Because like I said, when I heard about it, I was like so excited, because it's like finally a help from the doctors. Because one of the things that people say constantly is, I go to the doctor, I get a diagnosis, I get a prescription, I get another appointment, and if I'm lucky, I might get the number to the Alzheimer's Association, and that's like it. And so they're out on Google, they don't know about support groups. They don't know about all these beautiful programs that are out there. And so I was very excited, because I think doctors knowing these other resources, and being able to tap into this is actually going to change, how the diagnosis is even given to the families, because so many of them get that diagnosis, and I'm sure you understand this. They go out to the car and they cry sometimes for a couple hours before they can even drive home, because they feel so lost. So I have great hopes on the guide program.
Sure. Well, we all do. At the very highest level, GUIDE is an acronym for Guiding an Improved Dementia Experience. So that's the concept. And the overarching impetus, as I said a little bit earlier, for this was the success that they had in these pilot programs through the National Institutes of Health. And at the highest level, it's an 8-year program that has been, it's funded, and the intent is to capture all kinds of data. And I can tell you there is a lot of data that we are required to track, so that they can prove that this program is effective. And so it's actually, the program itself is out of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid, so that's CMS or Medicare as we call it, but the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation Group. So they are sort of the think tank that is trying for Medicare and Medicaid to identify best practices and new programs. So they have lots of programs that come out, and this is the latest and greatest for dementia care.
So you said 8 years.
Yeah.
And I know that from my very minimal knowledge, it sounded like anybody who wanted to participate in this, and this is people who are already hooked up with getting, payments through CMS, had to apply by the 1st of this year.
You're talking about the application for participating providers.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Correct.
Go ahead.
No, you finish, and then I can flesh out the details.
And that, kind of kicked the barn doors open in July 1st for those who were approved with this. So, let's talk about the goals of the program. One is data, but
Yeah.
what kind of data are they looking at, and what type of help are they hoping to offer families?
Sure. Well, without going into the dirty detail, there are over 105 data elements that we are supposed to capture about the dyad. The dyad is the fancy language for the caregiver patient combination. So we have to have information not only about the patient, but also about the caregiver themselves, because one of the, so the three goals that you asked about is number one, improved quality of life for the patient. Okay. So that's the first goal. The second goal is to reduce the level of burden on the caregivers, because CMS understands that the caregiver is doing a lot of this work without any compensation, but if while they do that work, it reduces the ultimate cost to Medicare because that patient isn't in skilled nursing. And then the third goal is to keep the patient at home for as long as possible and keep them out of skilled nursing. So the three goals, again, improved quality of life for the patient, reduced burden on caregiver, and keep the patient at home as long as possible.
And everybody says they want to stay home.
Yeah.
I mean, goes back to my real estate days. You're going to take me out feet first. I'm not going any place with that. And that still really, really hasn't changed a whole heck of a lot. What kind of healthcare providers can, provide this offering?
Sure. So you were starting to get there, and I mentioned the numbers before, but the official terminology for a provider who can offer guide is they are called a participating provider. And in order to be a participating provider, you had to apply by the end of January of this year. And then all of the applications were reviewed, and on or about the 1st of May, applicants were notified whether they had been accepted into the program or not. Mm-hmm. And there are actually two different levels of how to be accepted into the program. So you could be an existing program, which means that you are treating dementia patients now, and that you were doing a majority of the care delivery services that we'll talk about at some point already. So you're not trying to build this from scratch. You've got most of the work already done. And if you qualified as an existing program, then you could start treating patients as of July 1st of 2024. If you didn't qualify by, had done a majority of the care delivery already, or you weren't actively treating dementia patients to the level that Medicare wanted you to, but you committed to being ready to do that by next year, then you could be in what they call the new program. And the new program is for people who need more time to build out their set of services. And so those organizations start on July the 1st of next year, 2025.
Okay. Well, that's understandable. I mean, this is a big to do. So there's a lot of wheels that got to click together to make this machine roll, for sure.
That's right.
On that. So, you said there was like 90 some people companies that have been approved in about
correct.
300 more.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I neglected to put that into my answer to your question. So yeah, there are 96 organizations that are approved as existing programs. And that varies by state. And they range, everywhere from large hospital systems down to small practices. And I think that some of that was intentional because Medicare wants to see how these programs are working and what, are there any trends to who does it better? So.
Yep. Well, yeah, because being able to pass that along to the others, if it can reduce the work to set up and streamline things, that makes a ton of sense to be able to get that out and going. I want to just do a little break here. And for those of you who might just be popping in right now, we have been talking with Marty Agather from the Embrace Prevention Care Company about the guide program for dementia. And their website is embracepreventioncare.com. And if you want to go right to kind of this program and their dementia care, do a / dementia care on that. And their email is info@embracepreventioncare.com. You can also call them as well at 302-329-8452.
That phone number is to our care delivery team, and so they can give you some information on that. Now, at present, we are only working with patients in Delaware and Pennsylvania. So we do not have operations outside those states at this point. We're working on developing relationships in a number of additional states as well.
Okay, wonderful. Well, that's fantastic. I also, before we go back to our questionings, I want to just give a plug for Q for Good. Many of you out there have websites and probably have struggled like I have trying to find a good webmaster. These guys are excellent. They communicate, they follow up, they reduce your stress, they design beautifully. And, if you want to reach out to them, it's just qforgood.com, mention my name, and you'll get a 10% discount. But I know for me, I struggle with getting a good webmaster. And so I just love to plug them because I really, truly do believe in them. So let's get back to talking about the guide program. Let's say I want to see if I qualify for this. What is my next step? How do I find a physician? What do I do?
Sure. So, unfortunately, right now it's not very well organized at the guide level. So while the name of a provider in your state is available on Medicare's website, and I've got that we can get that in the show notes, I suppose, Lori. It's at the bottom of the piece I sent over to you, but it doesn't really tell you what their area of operation is, and this is one of the challenges of the program. It's actually beneficial, but it's hard to say how each entity, each participating provider has taken this up. So let's before we get to the dirty details, let's talk at a high level. You can be referred into a program by your primary care physician or your neurological specialist. So if they have knowledge of the program, they can refer you directly to the participating provider who is required to work with you. Okay, it doesn't mean they're required to put you in the program, but they are required to work with you, and there's a number of reasons why that is. But what's important to know so that's number one. Number two, you could also, if you find out about a program, so you look on the Medicare website and you see that Dr. Smith in New York City is providing guide services, you can call. You don't need a referral from your physician to go. So you can actually call Dr. Smith and say, I understand you're a participating provider in the guide program. We'd like to see if we qualify.
Okay. And I would imagine to qualify, they'd still probably need a referral within network and all of that kind of stuff, the way insurance works.
Yeah. However, so that brings up, eligibility requirements. So let's talk a little bit about that. So the number one eligibility requirement is that you've got to be on Medicare Part A and Part B. So for people who don't live in the Medicare world day to day, and it's very confusing, trust me, I'm in the business and I can hardly get it right. Medicare Part A and Part B is what we call traditional Medicare. So that is not supplied by an insurance company like Blue Cross or Humana. Medicare, traditional Medicare comes directly from the government. So you cannot be, unfortunately, in a Medicare Advantage program through Blue Cross. And we can get into why that is, but there's a couple other exclusions I want to get to as well. So in order to qualify for the program, if you're in traditional Medicare, you must have a dementia diagnosis. So that's the first piece. The second piece is there's a number of exclusions that are not included. So number one is if you are in a PACE program. PACE is the program for all-inclusive care for the elderly. So that is a program, I believe it's state-run. It is state-run. And if you're in a PACE program, if your loved one is in a PACE program, you will know that. The second one is you cannot be in a skilled nursing facility, because at that point, the third goal has already been eliminated. And then the other exclusion is for patients who are in hospice, because obviously at that point, we are pretty much to the end of the journey. So those are the exclusions. And then of course the big one is the exclusion for Medicare Advantage. And I can explain a little bit about why Medicare Advantage is excluded. It's kind of complicated, but essentially every patient in a Medicare Advantage program is actually the vast majority of their care is being paid for by the government from Medicare already, even though you're getting your care from Blue Cross. Your Medicare is actually paying the bill, and it's a complicated explanation of why that is and how it works, and we don't need to go there. But basically, Medicare's position on this is, well, we're already paying for the patient once through the Medicare Advantage program, so we're not going to pay this additional care. That's up to Medicare Advantage. Now, the good news is we believe that as the efficacy of this program is shown, as we show improved results for these patients, a slowing of the progression of the disease, we believe that Medicare Advantage companies are going to want to provide similar care to guide to their patients. So, what can you do to prepare? My recommendation right now is if you're on traditional Medicare, stay on it. If you're on a Medicare Advantage program, we know you're not eligible, but come enrollment period, which starts in October, you can switch from your existing Medicare Advantage program to Medicare so that you can enroll in Guide as soon as you enter the program. And Lori, we did talk a little bit about this a month or so ago when the last time we spoke, and I did check. There are no pre-existing conditions in traditional Medicare. Just as the only requirement is that you get it done between October and December 31 and get switched over to traditional Medicare.
Oh, that's good because I had heard that if you had dementia, they wouldn't accept you
No,
flipping
so
over.
yeah, so
So
that's
thank you for checking on that.
you
Appreciate
got
it.
it.
Wonderful. Now, one of the other things that Guide covers is the caregiver, but do they have to be on Medicare or because there's a lot of kids or
Right.
spouses that are younger, that are caring for somebody who may or may not be on Medicare themselves. What's the qualification there and eligibility?
Sure. So at first it's got to be an unpaid caregiver.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't speak with a whole lot of clarity to who is going to be identified as a qualifying caregiver. But let's roll back just for a second. So, because we forgot to talk about the primary benefit of Guide, and that is all of this additional care, which we'll get to in a minute, all of this additional care is provided to the person living with Alzheimer's and the caregiver, if they qualify, at no additional charge. There are no copays, there are no deductibles. This is literally additional care at no additional cost. So that's a wonderful, wonderful benefit. And if the caregiver qualifies, then there is an additional benefit to the caregiver for what we call respite care. And respite care is when the caregiver needs a break and, has someone come into the home or actually has the patient go to adult daycare or potentially an overnight or multi-day overnight stay at a facility. And in the event that the caregiver qualifies for this benefit, that will be paid by Medicare up to $2,500 in expenses each year.
So that's wonderful. I mean, that's one of the things people are kind of drowning out there right now, looking for respite. And as we had talked offline, so many of our adult days, went out of business
Yeah,
during
yeah,
COVID. It haven't popped back yet.
it is very difficult in some parts of the country to find respite.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of our responsibilities. Well, the participating provider's responsibilities is to find, because that's one of the required services that we have to deliver, is to find respite care companies. So that's the beauty of the program, is all of these resources are required to be found by the participating providers and their service providers. So that's great. But it is, you are absolutely correct. Finding qualified respite providers is a real challenge in some parts of the country.
Yeah. And as we had talked before too, some of it is that they've shortened their hours, and a lot of people don't think that's really not going to help me. I'm going to rush to get them there, and by the time
Yeah.
I turn around and go do my grocery shopping or go get my nails done or go see a ball game or whatever, I have to rush back or maybe cut it short to pick them up because a lot of them, like I said, the hours have just cut back on that. So hopefully that's something that will change. And
Well, the good news is that I believe as the word of this program gets out, there are going to be new businesses, or existing businesses will expand because they realize the opportunity of all the added demand, because families that are in the program now have the ability to finance respite.
yeah, because a lot of times they just can't afford it. So getting back to my question
Oh,
on caregivers, do they have to be on Medicare or
they
Medicaid?
they they do not have to be on either of Medicare or Medicaid. The very first thing that we do when a patient asks us to enroll in the program is first we ask some questions. Let's find out about your insurance, because if you're not traditional Medicare, you don't qualify. But then the next thing that we are required to do is what's called a comprehensive assessment. That's one of these guide care delivery services that we're required to provide. That's one of the 9. And that comprehensive assessment is an assessment of both the patient and the caregiver. And so we work with the patient and the caregiver to assess the level that they're at, which ultimately then goes to Medicare, and then Medicare makes the decision: is this patient qualified, and does the caregiver qualify?
So basically, the program is under the patient's Medicare.
Correct.
Insurance.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the caregiver doesn't have to qualify. What about all the people that don't have a caregiver, that are, just swimming this thing upstream by themselves?
Well, so the program is actually designed to cover them as well. Obviously, it's much harder for that patient as the disease progresses, because the primary method of interaction, I said this early on, the value of virtual care was proven in these National Institute of Health studies. And so the vast majority of the care that's being delivered is virtual in nature. And obviously, while we can use video, we can use regular telephone, as we talked earlier, that ability to comprehend as the disease progresses gets harder and harder. But there are 5 different tiers, and we won't get into the details, but there are 5 different tiers of the way that patients and the caregivers are classified. 3 of those are for patients with caregivers, and there are two classifications for patients who have no caregivers, and that's moderate and then severe for the patients without caregivers.
Okay, so I hope for the ones without caregivers, so many of them call somebody who's assisting them, but might not be, like a live-in, like a spouse or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They call them their backup brain. And they help them with bills, and they help them with organization and things like that. I hope that they are taken into consideration in terms of the support that they give, because they're out there helping people get their, legal documents in order, and just, trying to figure out adaptions and shortcuts, as the disease progresses.
And although I am not qualified to talk about how Medicare is going to, determine caregivers, but and this is not coming from a place of knowledge. It's an assumption that this is the case. I don't believe there's a requirement that it's a live-in. Mm-hmm. So I would say that those secondary brains, is that what you call them?
Backup brains.
Backup brains, great, yeah. Those backup brains should make themselves known as part of the application process, so that they can be assessed to see if they qualify.
Okay, and it would be good for, in the assessment, and I don't know if it's in there, but for the assessor to be able to use familiar terms, or do you have someone who helps you on occasion pulling some of those things out? Because, again, you're dealing with somebody with dementia, and well, like with all of us, we have our definitions of what a caregiver is. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them are very proud that they're doing stuff on their own, even though they're having assistance. So letting them know that the door is open to hearing that, because that would be a good data point, even if it's not addressed, to be able to collect for people on that. So my 2 cents on that.
Absolutely.
Um, well, let's talk about, what exactly will the guide provide? We kind of went over some higher level stuff, but like, as a family member, what could I expect you really helping me with?
Sure. So at the highest level, the the primary provision of services to the family, the dyad, is a care navigator who is your connection to all of the care for the dementia patient.
That in
So,
itself is going to be huge and sweet and much appreciated because it's a complicated maze.
yeah. And so that care navigator has a number of responsibilities to provide these 9 services. And so that first service we've already talked about, and that was the comprehensive assessment.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that, as I said, it consists of the patient assessment,
Mm-hmm.
an assessment of the caregiver, but then there's also a home visit
Mm-hmm.
to assess the home itself, because we know that the home environment is potentially a cause for accidents and those kind of things, right? So all of those things are contributing to that assessment, which is then delivered to Medicare to determine eligibility. After Medicare says, yes, indeed, patient Marty is included and ready to participate and approved to participate, then the care navigator builds an individualized care plan specific to Marty.
Mm-hmm.
And that care plan must be signed off on. So first of all, before we get there, that comprehensive assessment has to be, and a dementia diagnosis, and that's why I said you've got to have a dementia diagnosis, has to be presented to a physician, and the physician says, yes, indeed, all the boxes are checked. The patient has been diagnosed with dementia. I believe that this patient is ready to be looked at by Medicare and approved for the program if they qualify. So a doctor has to sign off on the comprehensive assessment that's built by the care navigator. After the patient has been approved, then and that care plan is developed, then that doctor has to sign off on that care plan to say, yes, this care plan looks like it addresses the issues that Marty's having.
Okay.
All right.
One question I have before we go on is, from the time of the assessment to, Medicare approving this, any idea? Are we talking?
We are. So they have committed. Okay. So there is no requirement on how much time takes place between when the patient or the caregiver inquires about the program and the assessment must be done. And I'm going to give you a little bit of detail on the background of that. As a guide participant, you are not allowed to say no to a patient who approaches you about participating in the program. Everyone who says they want to be involved has to be given the comprehensive assessment, assuming they qualify. And that I told you about the pre-qualification. Are you actually in traditional Medicare, that kind of stuff. But once you pass that first assessment, you must be given the assessment, the comprehensive assessment. But there's no requirement on how quickly that must happen, because every organization has its own limits on how many of those they can get done, right?
Mm-hmm.
If as soon as a guide participant says, I don't have the ability to service Marty. At that point, they can no longer accept any new patients. So while I can't speak for other organizations, what I can tell you is how we're going to deal with that is when we are approached by a caregiver or a dementia patient, we will say, absolutely, we've got you on the list and we will get to you as quickly as you can. So that's the first source of delay. But hopefully, and frankly, what we have found is the delay at this point is not on our side. It's actually getting everything lined up with the patient and the caregiver to get that assessment underway. So, as you can imagine, caregivers are doing a lot of things and it's hard to get on their schedule. So that has been sort of the bottleneck for us.
Plus, there's a discomfort a lot of times with people coming into the house and people not sure I want to go there.
Well, and so thankfully the assessments can be done virtually. The in-house piece of this is done after the patient has been accepted into the program and the comprehensive care plan, individualized, personalized care plan has been developed. So we're already building a relationship at that point. So hopefully that assuages some of the concerns of the family about having someone come into the home, right? Mm-hmm. But to go back to your original question, so once we have finished the comprehensive assessment and the physician has signed off and says, yes, I believe that this patient will, potentially qualifies. I've done the pre-work to say, yes, the patient has dementia. Yes, all of the paperwork has been filled out and they submit it to Medicare. Medicare has committed to us in the program contract that they will turn around those decisions in 45 days.
Okay.
And then once they notify us that patient Marty has been attributed to Dr. Smith, we then are on the clock. And I think it's and I don't have the exact answer to this, but I believe we have to notify the patient within 45 days.
Okay. And
this is all stuff, and we talked about all the data requirements. We have to track all of that so that when we inevitably get audited by Medicare, we can show them that we were in compliance with all the guidelines.
Okay. So it could be up to potentially almost 3 months.
3 months, yeah.
Mm-hmm. For that. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's go on. So we've got the comprehensive assessment, we've got the care plan. Then what comes? What are the other points?
So, and I'm going to give it to you in the way that Medicare gave it to all of us, but in my mind, it's not logical the way they structured it. But the next care delivery service is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week call service. So you either have to be able to talk with a care navigator or talk to a service that will then notify the the care navigator for follow-up. Okay. So that's a great resource for caregivers, because we know that often, it's not 2:00 on a Tuesday that these things happen. It's 12:30 a.m. On Saturday. So that's a huge benefit. What we believe one of the biggest benefits to the patient is the ongoing monitoring and support. And this is calls with the care navigator to understand how the patient is doing, calls to the caregiver to understand where are you struggling, how can we help, what education can we provide to help you be more effective in your role. And again, this is where there's a little bit of leeway in the how this care delivery service is provided. Embrace, we will be in contact with every one of our patients and caregivers at least once a month and more frequently if needed.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. And that ongoing support.
I believe that I believe the requirement for frequency of contact is, we talked about the 5 tiers.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it's related to those 5 tiers. I'm not certain on that. I think if you're in a low level with a caregiver, it's a minimum of quarterly that contact is made. Okay. If you're in a severe, it's got to be monthly.
Okay.
But our stated objective is once a month for everybody, at a minimum of once a month.
Okay, that's nice. That's nice. What else?
Okay, so the big one is, and this is one of the things that I'm dealing with right now, and that's care coordination and transition of care. So care coordination. Many of these patients, in addition to having a primary care physician, will also have a neurologist. And the participation contract doesn't require, but it strongly suggests that the care navigator communicate with the primary care physician and any specialists. And again, this is another area that, there's a little bit of leeway. Our policy will be that we want to develop the best relationship with not only neurologists, but other specialists that the patient will have in addition to the primary care physician, because we believe that these comorbidities can accelerate the disease progression. And so we want to work with the patient on as many of their health conditions as we can, knowing that that's going to reduce the potential for the progression of dementia.
Well, the other thing that it's going to do is a lot of families are uncomfortable on how to communicate to the doctor because they don't want to bring stuff up during the appointment, sometimes in front of the patient, though that information needs to get delivered. And not everybody, especially many of our older adults, they don't even have email. Many do, but it's just not comfortable. Everything's now, we'll just text here. We'll send it to you on the phone, and they're like, it's too small.
Use my app and look it up on your right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So to be able to have a care navigator that could, it would probably be easier on the doctors too. Pull all of that together, get that information centralized so everybody's seeing the same thing, because there's nothing worse than, well, I didn't know that was happening over here. That's going to be a massively positive process, I think, to help everybody be on the same page. And it lifts the burden off the family of trying to figure out how to do that or when to do that, because what I hear from them all the time is, I don't have time. I don't want to get into the loop. I don't use a portal. Don't tell me to go to the portal,
Well, and as important, many caregivers aren't medical professionals. Mm-hmm. So it's very difficult to have a conversation between a professional and a non-professional, because it's literally, you're speaking 2 different languages.
Yep.
And so that's a huge piece of the care navigation is having that medical professional in the loop who is able to talk, in a very short sentence exactly what the issue is, because I'm using professional words that the physician, that their primary care physician, is going to know exactly what I'm saying, and they'll have a response.
Yeah, and
Right?
it's not a story that's 2 pages long,
That's
and
exactly
they're
right.
still reading it, going, "What was the question?" Yeah,
Right. Right. And more importantly, the non-professional may not even pick up on the actual issue that's there, right?
oh, very true.
Because they're not trained to understand how that all works.
Yep.
So that's a huge value. The second half of that we just briefly touched on is the transition care, and that is, exactly what my mother's going through right now, which is when you are discharged from the hospital and you need to go to another facility, there's a lot of coordination that takes place. And having that care navigator involved in that process makes that go a lot smoother.
Yep. So let me ask you this. So let's say let's say we'll use your mom as an example. Let's say she goes to transitional care, but they realize, okay, she no longer can live independently. This just isn't, we're not getting her where we want her to go. Then does the program cease? She gets placed, and then it's just
so I don't honestly know the answer to that question. My guess would be no. It is, so another piece of this is the referral coordination. So we are participating providers are supposed to have a list of resources available to guide the family. So where are respite centers? Where are facilities that could do more assisted living, right? So we have access to that, but we aren't required to actually get the placement done.
Okay. So just my 2 cents on that. I hope when that information is passed off to families, it's not just a name and a phone number and an address, but you have guided questions for them to ask, because they don't know what questions to ask to be able to protect their loved one, to be able to make sure the care is accurate. And it sounds silly from, do you have openings? Because if you don't have openings and you don't have a male or a female bed, whatever I need, I'm off to the next one, because you're under that crunch time. And families don't know that, and they'll stay on the phone because somebody else is trying to sell them a bed that's not existent. And so I really hope that there's something pulled together to help people through that, because I have dealt with so many families that just, I've been worried that the care partner is going to have a heart attack and all bets are going to be off during that process, because they have it's just overwhelming with what they're dealing with.
And I thought I was fairly well prepared for this. And, when we had a meeting with the care team a week ago Wednesday, and they said, well, unless your mom continues to make progress, we can't let her stay here. And I said, okay. And they said, well, we don't have any beds. And it was like, oh, well, I didn't even begin to contemplate the point. I figured once she was in for all stages, right?
Yep.
Well, no, it's all dependent upon what's going on. Now, thankfully, we've solved that problem because a bed has opened up, but you're right.
Yep. And it's like you got 2 to 3 days to get it moved, or they threaten that they are going home, and they know that they can't go home with them, but that threat is used, I can't tell you how many times, and it's horrible with the family, because they know that they can't do that. Okay, well, let's go to number 5.
Sure. So this one goes, in conjunction with sort of that care coordination. There's a requirement for medication reconciliation and medication management. So the whole idea is to understand what's the current list of medications that the patient should be on, and making sure that they are actually have prescriptions for those meds. There's also some requirements and one of our founding partners in the company is a career. He's a pharmacist, and there's a requirement that I don't know the details on, but we are also graded. The participating providers are graded on the patient's utilization of some very, very, I don't know even know what the right word is because I'm not a pharmacist, but let's just call them very heavy medications that they want us to minimize and eliminate whenever is possible for dementia patients. So that is huge because, again, going back to that coordination of care between professionals, once we've got the approved list, we can then circulate that to the primary care physician, to the neurologist, so that they've got the latest information. And then as the primary care physician determines that changes are needed, we make sure that the lists are updated and get circulated.
And that's going to be so helpful because, again, I can't tell you how many families I've talked to that said, oh my gosh, they put somebody on this medication and it just blew up everything. I mean, the adverse reactions for some of them, I mean, were downright critical and threatening. I mean, they got aggressive, all kinds of stuff. But being able to have that review and as we all know, some medications just don't mix well together. And some medications don't mix well with certain types of dementia as well. And so, and that's something families typically don't know until it was mixed. And then they found out there was an issue after the fact, which usually ends up in a hospitalization and sometimes being tossed into a geri psych unit, which we don't have enough of those either. So that's going to prevent a lot of problems, I think, with that.
That's correct.
Gosh, that's great. Okay, well, let's keep going because I think you said there were 9 of them.
Yeah, and I'm looking at my list and I see that, I think we've talked about all but the last 2. So somehow we got, but so now the last 2 are focused on the caregiver. Mm-hmm. And the first of them is caregiver education and support. So this isn't, as we've talked about this whole time, this isn't just specific to the patient. And that care navigator has a role to play with the caregiver as well. But there is a requirement that we provide, that every participating provider provide caregiver education on dementia. So that is going to be a huge, huge benefit because we all start out and knowing nothing. And so just the ability to have that available as a resource will be a godsend. The other piece of this that is our personal philosophy is that the caregiver is our biggest ally. And the more we can help them understand not only what to do, but the why to do it, that's critical. Because then they understand, I understand why we're focusing on hydration. Because hydration is so critical, right? And so then they are stressing and accentuating the exact same things to mom or dad. It's really important, that you drink this glass of water because that's going to keep you from having, blood pressure issues, right? Which then turn into falls. And so that education and caregiver support is a huge one. Oh, and then the last one is the one that we've already talked about, which is, the respite care.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so and that'll be great. I wanted to add on the caregiver education piece.
Yeah.
Approaching that from the whys is so critical. We have, there's so much stigma around this disease and we have been told for years and years and years, and it's, it's started to change, but for years and years and years, we have been told, if they don't know you, you don't need to show up. There's nothing you can do. And And I know from my 30-year journey with my own mom, that is so far from the truth. It's not even funny. And understanding those whys to change our approach, will change our outcomes. And, really little things matter. For example, I'll just use the one of sundowning. It absolutely drives care partners crazy. Why are they following me? I can't even go to the bathroom, And I always explain it that you have to think that you've become their security blanket. You're like Charlie Brown's security blanket to them. You give them comfort. They're scared of this world. They don't understand it anymore. And just being able to think to yourself, gosh, how lucky am I to give somebody that much comfort, changes your reaction to that, to their reaction. I don't even like calling it a behavior, because when we call it a behavior, we're putting them down and we're telling them they're the problem. And they're just trying to communicate with us. They're just trying to feel safe in this world. So there's so many cool things that can be done to shift and to ease, how we look at things. I think that is going to be really well received, and I think the outcomes are going to be amazing with that. Now, one of the things that I had heard, and I don't know if this is true or not, but it was one of the things that excited me too about the program, was that physicians were going to be able to refer out to other programs. So if it's memory cafes or an art class or doing something with horses, there's just so much stuff out there that people don't know even exists. Is that part of this program? Would those be considered
so that would
respite time things?
I can't answer your question honestly. I think there's probably some requirements for what qualifies as respite that would be paid for, but I don't know enough about the details to even venture a guess. I can tell you that that's part of, one of the specific benefits, and this might be the one we missed, or I don't remember, is referral coordination. So the whole point is the care navigator is supposed to have a list of all sorts of services that they can refer the patients and the carers to. So, I don't know, again, I don't know what the requirements are for how broad that list has to be. Again, our belief is that the more of those services that we have available, the more valuable that service becomes. So we intend to have fully fleshed out lists of all sorts of those resources. But as you say, if you don't know it exists, it really doesn't exist, right? And so I'm not sure I even understand all of the services that might be available.
Yeah. Well, and none of us are ever going to, know them all, because no one's really gathering them. I mean, our dementia map is doing that to an extent, but again, it's small compared to the mountain of services that are out there. But, there's cool things from, the choirs that people can participate in, to the memory cafes that are support groups for people with dementia and their care partners, which again gets them in a peer setting so they don't feel so alone. That is really powerful. To respite care, to online music therapists doing sessions. Many of these things are for free. Caregiver coaches on top of the care navigator. I don't know how much coaching they'll really be able to do with some things, because I that in alone is a massive job, just connecting the dots and keeping that going smooth. So yeah, there's so many neat things. And I hope that the guide is open to looking through all their data points at all these creative things to be able to help people feel engaged and feel part of the community, because nobody wants to be a diagnosis. They want to be a person that engages and has a social life and things. So
Absolutely.
This has been wonderful. Now,
Before we part, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you a question, because you very briefly mentioned the dementia map, but I want you to go into a little bit more detail in case any of our listeners aren't familiar with that resource, because it's wonderful.
oh, thank you. Well, Dementia Map was always a vision of mine since day one. When I'm amazed that no one's pulled this together, but I wanted to have a place where it was free to access, that is useful for people with dementia. So it's simple for those living with dementia, as well as their care partners that are exhausted, both family and professional. I think sometimes we divide it up, like as a professional I need this, and as a family member you need that, and it's like, no, we all need to know this type of information. And we have like 150 categories that people can search. There are products, services, and tools. There's a wonderful blog. There's glossary of terms because we don't know what we don't know. And there's a calendar of events that actually isn't built out near to what it once was. And I think a lot of it has to do from the feedback I'm getting from staff shortage, being able to get those things inputted. So we're looking at trying to do something a little bit different to connect people, because going to Google's scary. You don't know what is good and what isn't. We wanted something that was available on a global basis, because so much, even like our dementia-friendly communities and memory cafes, those weren't U.S. ideas. Those came from overseas. So we can inspire and share so much of what's going on and learn from one another, and let people have ease of access where they don't have to give any personal information. We're not collecting data points on the site. We just want to make sure people feel comfortable that they're not going to get hacked or scammed or bothered. We hear that over and over. And then I'll also plug Alzheimer's Speaks, which was my main site that I started back in 2009 when I stepped into this space. We have one whole section that is just free educational resources. So, they can find the radio show there. They can find Dementia Chats, which is something that I facilitate monthly with people living with dementia. And they tell us what it's like. What are their needs? What's working? What's not? We have Dementia in the Arts, where we interview people that showcase their artwork. And again, that's one of the things that has really resonated with me, because what we hear over and over from people doing all different types of art is when they're in the zone, their symptoms decline. And sometimes they just melt away. And yet we have this belief that they can't learn anything new. And, you look at some of the artwork, some of these guys should be commissioned, and they never did art before their dementia. So, it's kind of a stigma buster. We have a section for poetry. People submit poems because not everybody wants to go to a support group, but they can feel and they can see what someone's describing through a poem in private, and they can laugh, they can cry to themselves, because maybe they'll never be ready to go to a support group. So we try to have a lot of different resources, things, plus some tools that I've developed over the years that people can just download. And we're always looking at, new ways to connect. But again, everything on there is free, because I know people just can't afford all this stuff, but they need access to it and they deserve it. So thanks for asking on that. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Now, you had also given me where people can find more information to find guide providers. So I'm just going to put that in the show notes for everyone to be able to.
That's perfect.
Find. I really appreciate your time.
No problem. I have one more interesting news bit. So I unfortunately don't have all of the details yet, but I guess two things. So Medicare committed to notifying every traditional Medicare patient in the country who has been identified as potential dementia through care that's been provided by their neurologist or primary care physician, with a letter saying these are the guide participating providers that are supporting your zip code. And therefore not making a suggestion that company A is better than company B or anything like that. But that is, those, we don't know when those letters are going to go out, but, they had initially said that it would have been later this fall, but I think they have rolled that back into 2005 to 2025, because obviously then the new programs will be coming online later that summer. So that's number one. But number two, just this week we were asked by Medicare to provide the URL of the participating provider to them, because they are going to publish a directory of all of the websites of the participating providers. I don't know when that is going to be published, but the requirement was that you had to have your website into them by midnight on this coming Monday. So that's going to be another resource. Unfortunately, I can't tell you where that is. But for those of you who can't find the link that Lori's going to put in the show notes, you can just go to cms.gov. That's the Center for Medicare Services, cms.gov, government. And if you type in the search bar, the little looking glass, magnifying glass, if you just type guide, you will get to the guide section, which is where this link will also take you. So there's an article there that has a link in it that will download a spreadsheet of all 390 some of the approved participating providers, and it will tell you, are they established, meaning they can treat patients now, or are they new, which means that they can start treating patients next July.
Okay, well, that's wonderful, because like I said, when I first heard about this, everyone I talked to, no one knew anything about this, and so I've been really trying to elevate this and get this out there, and it is important for people to understand that, okay, there's 90 some providers. That's for the whole U.S. So there might not be anybody in your area. Let me ask you this, though. Is it possible to do some of these services just via telehealth? I know, like the assessment they had to do in home.
Yes,
but is there something that is modified out there to be able to reach more people at all?
All of these services are designed and are approved to be delivered via telehealth.
Okay.
So that's the real power of this. So, without going into the arcane details, when COVID came down, there were a number of healthcare services that were authorized to be provided by healthcare via an emergency act. And that act expires on January 1st of next year. And so there's a lot of care services that are going to have to go back to in-person visits. But Guide was specifically designed so that all of the services could be delivered via healthcare. Now, just a personal anecdote, one of the patients that we are working with to get them into the program, the caregiver said, I don't think a telehealth visit will be effective for my husband. So we are going to meet the caregiver and the patient at the primary care physician's office in order to do the dementia assessment. Okay. So obviously there may be some need for in-person stuff, but the program was designed to be fully deliverable via telehealth.
Okay. And I would think even with the home assessments that you would be able to hire somebody to do that.
Yes, and so that's so the way we're handling that is we are working with third party providers,
Mhm.
which we have to have a contract with and notify Medicare of that relationship. But we are doing that with a third party home assessment company.
Okay. Well, wonderful. Again, you can go to Marty's website, which is embracepreventioncare.com, embracepreventioncare.com. And if you do a / dementia care, you'll get right to this. You can email them at info@embracepreventioncare.com, or you can call and talk to them at 302-329 8452. And again, we'll have all this in the show notes, along with the cms.gov that you can search for, and the long link as well for people to be able to go directly to. For our listeners, I just want to say thank you so much. Please be a giver of hope. Join Alzheimer's Speaks and help pass the word of information. You don't know who is in your sphere of influence that needs this information, because this is an uncomfortable conversation and a lot of people aren't ready to have it, but they see your feeds and they will reach out when they're ready. And I think this is great information. Also, this is something that can help families go in and ask their doctors, hey, do you know about the guide program? Because a lot of dementia families are educating their physicians on resources that are available, and this is just another one for them to gain knowledge of in case they're not aware of it. Their time is limited as well. So
that is a very great point, because I can tell you from personal experience that the vast majority of physicians, even neurologists and dementia specialists who you would believe should know about this, have no idea. Yep. Now, the really gratifying thing is that when I talk to them about this program, physicians say, oh, this sounds like something I definitely want to refer my patients to, because I know that this will be helpful for them. And we are also seeing dementia experts who are saying, hey, how can I participate? Because this would be vital for my patients.
Exactly.
So don't be surprised if you go to your physician and you know more about the guide program than they do, because unfortunately it's a well-kept secret right now. But we're hopeful that through the great efforts of Lori publicizing this, that we're going to get the word out, because this is truly a great resource for people living with dementia and the people that love them.
Exactly. And again, I think getting this information out to the doctor's office will change how they give a diagnosis, because so many doctors, and we've talked to many, there's been studies on it, and there was a study not too many years ago that said a lot of them weren't even passing on the diagnosis because there was nothing they felt they could do to help the family. And this is setting up a whole different page and shining a light, and hopefully getting people to understand, nobody wants any diagnosis, but it's not going away just because you don't want it. And there is help out there. There's a ton of it. And we just want to connect you to the right things to get rid of your pain points so you can get on living life and having a quality life, and building on the relationships that you have. So again, Marty, thank you so much. Appreciate your time today.
You're very welcome, and thank you for having me.
And we'll have you back for an update, maybe in a year or something, or if there's more things that happen on how is this being received, and tweaks and changes, all of that kind of stuff too. So thank you.
You're very welcome.
Bye, everyone.
It's time to rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Hey everybody, Jared Sebesta here, host of Retire Repurposed. Now, this podcast is about the non-financial parts of retirement, which many times can be even more challenging than the financial. We believe retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful, purposeful, and fulfilling season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. To listen now, search Retire Repurposed on your favorite podcast platform, Senior Resource, or Life Audio.